transfer to the separatory funnel. Knee head stopper, grab my hand. So I'm going to use this over the beaker just in case I spill it. Now I want to mix that well, vent it. And you see I've got a clear, kind of yellowy layer, and a slightly cloudy bottom layer, but I'm going to extract that again with ether, so I don't really care if there's a little bit of ether in my water layer at this point. Get that most of the way down, and then best way to get the last little traces out is flip it over. And we'll transfer the ether layer to a clean and dry 125 ml Erlenmeyer. And closing the stopcock, return the water layer. I'm going to go ahead and use the ether to rinse out the 125 ml filter flask in case there's any product in there. Rinse out the beaker. And we will upend that and vent. Give a good swirl and vent. Still reacting a little bit. That's probably good enough. And we'll let that separate. Meanwhile, I'm going to measure out another 10 ml ether for the next extraction. Double check. Maybe it was 15 milliliters ether I was supposed to use for those. Yeah, I said 2 additional 15 milliliter portions, so a little skimpy on that first one. I'll use 15 for this one. Not critical. So once again, we'll take that bottom water layer out. And you'll see there's not much color in the top layer. Get close and then flip it over. Combine that ether layer with the previous one. And we'll put the water layer back. Again, I'm going to use the ether to rinse out the beaker. And mix it, vent. With ethers, because the density is enough different from water, it's safe to shake fairly vigorously. If I were doing dichloromethane or chloroform extraction, I would be a little bit more careful because they tend to emulsify, but ether really is quite well behaved. So we'll let that settle. I'm going to wash the combined ether extracts with about 10 milliliters of brine, 12 milliliters because that's what I poured. And that will help pull some of the water out the ether layer and make sure that our compound doesn't dissolve. Just enhance the separation a little bit of the two layers. And hopefully allow me to use a little less drying agent. So I'm done with that aqueous layer now. I'm going to leave the ether layer in there. And add the two previous ether layers to it. And now I'm going to add that 12 milliliters of saturated sodium chloride, or brine. Mix that nicely and let that vent. Heat of solution, and since ether boils so low, it built up a little pressure. Those layers separate. Toss this in the solid. There is no solid waste container. I'll have to go get one from the stockroom. There's a little water in here, so instead of using this one, I'm going to get another one that's actually completely dry. And add a little bit of sodium sulfate. My drying agent, that's probably enough. So, nicely separated. Got a really clear yellow layer on top and a clear this layer. And that water layer can go down the sink. I don't recommend doing this yourself necessarily, just in case you mess up and the layer you want goes down the sink too. And then we'll pour that ether layer onto the drying agent. Give that a good swirl. Always take the stopcock out of your separatory funnel when you clean it and put it away. And leave it assembled so that the O-ring doesn't get lost. It's usually enough to just rinse the stopcock under some water and let it dry. So let that sit, give it a little swirl. What we're looking for is that kind of snow globe effect. So that when we swirl it and then stop swirling, we can see some of the drying agent continue to move in the flask and not immediately stop. It doesn't get chunked. So I'll give that a good swirl. Hopefully if I'm pointing the camera right, you can see that when I stop swirling, the drying agent does not immediately stop. So that's probably enough drying agent. Solution should also be clear, not cloudy. So I'm going to let that sit for a little bit, probably in about 10 minutes, and then we will decant that and run it out.